Of every material that ever shaped human history, this is the one that looks like a complete joke. It is not a metal. It is not a stone. It is not a fuel, a grain, a weapon, or a tool. It is a thread, a soft, shimmering, weightless thread, spat out of the mouth of a blind, flightless worm. And for most of the last few thousand years, its entire job on this planet was to make rich people look expensive. That is it. Ancient Roman writers used to complain about it the way people today complain about anything they think is ruining society. They said the dresses made from it were so thin you could see straight through them, that respectable people were half naked in public, and that the empire was quietly hemorrhaging its fortune to dress its women in glorified cobwebs. Frivolous, vain, useless. The least serious material in the entire story of civilization. Except here's the twist, and it is a big one. This delicate little luxury thread, this glorified worm spit, was secretly one of the most powerful forces on the face of the earth. It built the first economy that ever spanned the globe. It saved soldiers on the battlefield. It fired the largest guns ever made. It invented the computer you are watching this on right now. And it handed us the foundation of all of modern medicine, all of it, from a worm. So let me show you how the softest, silliest, most useless thing humanity ever obsessed over turns out to have been the invisible thread holding the entire modern world together. Here's how the Western world actually met silk for the first time. Not in a shop, not draped over a queen, on a battlefield, pointed at them like a weapon. Roll back to 53 years before Christ. The richest man in all of Rome was a general named Crassus, a man so staggeringly rich, he had basically bought his way to the top, and the one thing his money had never managed to buy him was military glory. So he marched 7 entire legions, tens of thousands of men, deep into the deserts of the east to go pick a fight. Near a town called Carrhae, in what is now southeastern Turkey, a smaller, faster enemy cavalry surrounded them out in the open sand. The Romans were exhausted, roasting inside their armor. Rattled by the low thunder of enemy war drums they could not even see. And then, right at the hottest, brightest part of the day, the enemy did something no Roman had ever witnessed in his life. They threw off their dull cloaks and unrolled gigantic battle banners of brilliant, gold-threaded Chinese silk, and the whole desert lit up as these colossal sheets of shimmering fabric caught the sun and rippled like living fire. The legions, already at the edge, simply broke. They were slaughtered. Crassus was killed, and his head was carried off to the enemy king as a trophy. But Rome had seen silk now, and the empire fell for it instantly and completely. Like a spell it could not shake off. Within a lifetime, more than 100 ships a year were sailing east just to buy the stuff. And Roman riders were tearing their hair out that a single fabric was bleeding a fortune out of the empire, year after year after year. That obsession, that helpless craving for worm spit, is what carved out the most important trade route in the history of the world. We call it the Silk Road. It was named after this. So why was a bolt of cloth worth sending 100 ships across the known world? Because for thousands of years, exactly one place on Earth knew the secret of how to make it: China. And the entire miracle came down to one small, unremarkable, domesticated insect and the cocoon it wraps itself in. That was the secret, a bug. And China guarded that bug like the crown jewels of the universe. Trying to smuggle the worms or their eggs out of the country was a crime you paid for with your life. Inside China, silk was not just precious, it practically was money. Government officials collected their salaries in rolls of it. Farmers handed over their taxes in it. Long before real paper existed, people were writing maps and medical secrets directly onto silk cloth. And when ferocious nomad raiders threatened the borders, emperors would literally buy them off with heaps of silk just to make them go away. Sit with how strange that is for a second. An entire superpower, its wages, its taxes, its records, and its national defense, all of it resting on a thread coughed up by a caterpillar and on nobody else on the whole planet ever figuring out how the caterpillar did it, which of course meant that every single kingdom outside of China was absolutely dying to figure it out. And some of them were willing to do genuinely insane things to get their hands on the secret. And the things they did to steal it are some of the greatest heist stories ever told, and almost nobody knows them. Start with the Silk Princess. The story goes that when a Chinese princess was married off to the king of a small desert kingdom that was desperate for silk of its own, someone quietly warned her that if she ever wanted silk again after she left home, she had better bring the means to make it herself. So, on her wedding journey, she hid mulberry seeds and living silkworm eggs deep inside her enormous royal headdress. And when she reached the border, not one guard dared to search a princess's crown. The single most valuable secret in the world walked straight out of China, sitting on top of a bride's head. Then, centuries later, came the big one. Around 550 years after Christ, the emperor of Byzantium was so sick of paying the Persians a fortune to sit in the middle of the silk trade that he sent 2 monks on a covert mission all the way to China. They spent 2 years on it, and they came back having smuggled out somewhere around 26,000 living silkworm eggs, hidden inside their hollow bamboo walking sticks, hauling them nearly 5,000 kilometers across hostile land. In one quiet move, 2 monks and a couple of walking sticks shattered a monopoly that had held for thousands of years and handed all of Europe its own silk. And then, 1,000 years after that, the story turns industrial. An Englishman named John Lombe wanted the secrets locked inside the guarded silk mills of Italy, so he disguised himself as a lowly laborer, snuck into the mills, and sketched their secret machines by candlelight night after night, then smuggled his drawings home hidden inside bales of silk. He used them to build one of the very first factories in Britain. And this is not some small footnote. This was half a century before the famous cotton mills. Some people will argue that this one act of theft helped light the fuse on the entire Industrial Revolution. And John Lombe's reward for pulling it off? He was dead by 29, widely believed to have been quietly poisoned by an assassin the furious king of Italy had sent to settle the score. That is how much this thread was worth. People hid it in their hair, they hid it in their canes, and more than a few of them died for it. Now, you would think a fabric this precious would spend its whole life wrapped around emperors, safely far away from anything dangerous. You would be wrong, because silk kept slipping out of the palace and turning up on the battlefield, doing some of the ugliest jobs in all of warfare. Take the Mongols, the horsemen who conquered half the planet. They are said to have worn undershirts of tightly woven silk underneath their armor, and not for the comfort. Here is the trick. When an arrow hits a man, the barbed metal tip buries itself in the flesh, and when you try to rip it back out, it tears him apart on the way. But silk is almost impossible to cut, so when an arrow slammed into a silk-wearing Mongol, the fabric did not tear. It stretched and it wrapped itself around the arrowhead as the arrow drove into the wound. A field medic could then take hold of the silk and gently draw the whole thing back out, arrowhead and all, cleanly, without shredding the muscle. And because the silk had sealed itself around that filthy arrowhead, it kept the dirt out of the wound and quietly stopped the kind of infection that killed most wounded soldiers. And it did that centuries before anybody on Earth had the faintest idea that germs even existed. Hold on to that last part, because it comes roaring back later in a way you will not see coming. Then fast forward all the way to the age of the giant steel battleship, and silk found an even stranger job. The enormous guns on those ships needed hundreds of pounds of explosive powder for a single shot, and that powder got loaded down the barrel, packed inside cloth bags. But the navies ran into a nightmare. Ordinary cotton and canvas bags left tiny smoldering embers still glowing inside the barrel after the gun fired. So when the crew rammed the next enormous bag of powder in to reload, one of those leftover embers could set it off early and blow the entire warship to pieces. Only one material on Earth solved it: silk. Because silk is made of protein, it does not just burn. It completely vanishes in the heat and pressure of the blast, leaving nothing behind to smolder. So it became mandatory. Warships hoarded millions of yards of pure silk, not to look pretty, but purely so their biggest guns would not murder their own crews. The fabric of the emperor's robe was the only thing standing between a gun crew and a fireball, and people's hunger for this thread got so intense that simply running out of it caused actual riots in the streets. When the Second World War broke out and cut America off from its supply of Japanese silk, the military grabbed every last scrap of it overnight because they needed it for parachutes and for those very same gunpowder bags, which meant women suddenly could not get silk stockings anywhere. So a chemical company rushed out a brand new man-made substitute called nylon, and it sold like nothing anyone had ever seen. 4 million pairs in its first 2 days on the market. And then the war ate the nylon too, pulling it away for parachute cords and ropes. And women were reduced to painting fake stocking seams up the backs of their bare legs with eyeliner, just to look like they had any on at all. So when the war finally ended and the stockings came flooding back, all that pent-up demand exploded. In one city, a line of 40,000 women showed up to fight over just 13,000 pairs of stockings. 40,000 for 13,000 pairs. Women were pulling pulling each other's hair out in the street over them. In another city, a mob of 10,000 people smashed straight through a store window trying to get inside. Grown adults, rioting, fistfighting, and destroying property over a thread that had once been reserved for the robes of emperors. That is the kind of grip this soft little luxury has always had on the human brain. But none of that, not the empires, not the heists, not the riots, comes anywhere close to the single strangest thing silk ever did. Because silk invented the computer, and I mean that almost literally. To weave those gorgeous, intricate patterns into silk cloth, someone used to have to sit up on top of the loom and lift the individual threads by hand, one by one, unbelievably slowly, for every single row. It was miserable, endless work. Then, in 1804, a French weaver built a machine that did the whole thing automatically, and he controlled it using a long chain of stiff cards with holes punched into them. The logic of it was almost stupidly simple. If there was a hole in the card in a certain spot, a rod slid through and lifted that thread. If there was no hole, the rod hit solid card, got blocked, and the thread stayed down. A hole or no hole, up or down, on or off, a 1 or a 0. Stop and really look at that, because that is binary code. The exact same on, off, 1 or 0 language that every phone and every computer on Earth runs on today was invented, first, to weave flowers into fancy fabric. And it did not stop there. When a British mathematician named Charles Babbage got a look at this system of punch cards feeding instructions into a loom, a light went on in his head. He realized he could feed instructions into a calculating machine the very same way, and he set about designing what we now recognize as the first concept for a computer in history. And then, his collaborator, a brilliant woman named Ada Lovelace, saw something even deeper than Babbage himself did. She understood that those holes and blanks did not have to stand for threads. They did not have to stand for numbers either. They could stand for absolutely anything: letters, music, symbols, ideas. And she used that insight to write what is considered the very first computer program ever written, more than a century before there was an actual computer around to run it. She put it beautifully herself that the machine weaves patterns of algebra the same way the silk loom weaves flowers and leaves. So the entire digital world, the screen you are staring at, the device in your pocket, the whole glowing machine you are watching this video on, all of it traces its DNA straight back to a loom for making silk. And silk was still not finished rewriting the modern world, because it also handed us modern medicine, and that one happened almost entirely by accident. In the 1860s, a mysterious plague started sweeping through the silkworms of France, killing them by the millions and threatening to wipe out the entire European silk industry right along with them. The government panicked and sent in a chemist to go save it, a man named Louis Pasteur, who, and this is the good part, had never studied insects for a single day in his life. But Pasteur put those dying worms under his microscope and started hunting. He tracked down the tiny parasites that were killing them. He proved that the disease was spreading from worm to worm and that it was being passed straight down into their eggs. Then he worked out a precise, ruthless method to spot the infected eggs and destroy them before they could spread it. And just like that, he saved the silk industry. But in the middle of rescuing a bunch of caterpillars, Pasteur had stumbled into something 1,000 times bigger. He had just produced some of the first hard, undeniable, look at it under glass proof that specific, invisible living things cause specific diseases. That idea has a name. It is the germ theory of disease, and it is the single foundation that all of modern medicine is built on top of. Every time a surgeon scrubs in, every time a wound gets sterilized, every time an infection gets fought and beaten, all of it traces back to the moment the world finally accepted that invisible germs are real and that they are what make us sick. And we got there, in part, because a chemist who knew nothing about bugs got sent off to go save some dying worms. And here's the part that should genuinely stop you, because silk is not a story about the past. It is still going. Right now, in this decade, it is still a luxury industry worth more than $20 billion a year, still made mostly in China, and still, incredibly, made the exact same ancient way by dropping the cocoon into boiling water with the living creature still inside it, so the thread stays in one single unbroken strand, a strand that can run more than 1.5 kilometers long out of a single tiny cocoon. But the newest chapter is the one absolutely nobody saw coming. Scientists have discovered that the protein in silk can dissolve safely and gently inside the human body without the body fighting it or rejecting it. So they have started weaving silk directly into medicine itself, into scaffolds that help a body regrow tissue it has lost, into gels that release insulin at exactly the moment a patient needs it, and into a tiny feather-like patch, thinner than a coin, that rests painlessly on the skin of a premature baby and reads its vital signs straight through the skin, with no needle and no wire, just the colors on the patch shifting while a phone camera watches. The thread that once made emperors look expensive is now quietly being woven inside our own bodies to keep us alive. And that, right there, is the whole joke that history has been telling this entire time, so slowly and so quietly that almost nobody ever noticed the punchline. Of every material that ever shaped the human race, we pick silk as the useless one, the vain one, the frivolous, see-through, worthless little luxury spun by a helpless blind worm we bred so weak it can no longer even survive on its own. And the whole time, silk was doing the heaviest lifting in all of history. Our craving for it drew the first great road binding east to west and stitched the ancient world into one single economy. It was money. It was armor. It was the only safe way to fire the largest guns ever built. Its loom gave us binary and the computer. Saving its worms gave us germ theory and the ground that all of modern medicine stands on. And now, in this very year, it is being sewn into our own flesh to heal us. Every empire that ever laughed at silk as pure vanity was, without ever once realizing it, being quietly held together by it. So the next time you see a silk tie, or a scarf, or a shimmering thread you would have dismissed without a second thought, remember what it actually is, and then go find the next ordinary thing hiding a story this big, because that is exactly what we do here. The softest thing the human race ever made turns out to have quietly done some of the very heaviest work in the whole of history. Spun, from the very first day to this one, out of the cocoon of a small creature we still boil alive, just to keep the thread from breaking.